when those very reasons seem to become unreasonable, such that that whole activity of giving and asking for reasons suddenly becomes alienating, suddenly ceases to make any sense. Now, Hegel thought that you could, now we'll go into this a bit later, but Hegel thought you could trace out an entire path of history showing how certain activities, certain social practices of giving and asking for reasons, particularly political, artistic, religious, and philosophical reasons, would break down. And when that breaks down, what happens is that people find themselves in a new situation that's different from the old one. Metaphorically speaking, Greeks found they could no longer really be Greeks. Metaphorically speaking, it is as if the Greeks suddenly were saying things like, we do this because the gods have commanded it. Not a single one of us believes anymore in those gods or that they ever issued those commandments. But this is the reason we still give for why we are doing things. Now Marx said, you might say, somewhat convincing, look, the problem here, that really is the problem with Hegel. Hegel is an idealist. Hegel thinks that what we should look at is the reasons people give each other. Now, it's just idealist obfuscation here, right? That is, Marx's answer was, again, something that rings a bell as one of the examples of what Paul Ricoeur, right, was later to call the hermeneutics of suspicion. That when people are giving reasons to you, they're not really giving reasons. They're giving you something else. That reasons always occur within a particular class and economic background. And that in particular, Marx thought that the kinds of reasons we are giving each other in this modern capitalist world, in fact, are unreasonable. Look, capitalism, you might say, first question, why was Marx so anxious? Why was Marx so determined, right, to overthrow capitalism? What was wrong with capitalism, according to Marx? Well, really, there were three things he thought were wrong. I mean, first, capitalism poses as a system of freedom, but in fact it's a system of abject servitude. The worker is in servitude to the needs of capital, although in fact the whole rhetoric, whole ideology, the activity of giving and asking for reasons all revolves around freedom. So it's a system of servitude that calls itself freedom. Second, it's a system of exploitation. The entire system, Marx thought, is based on the exploitation. Of course, everyone, you've heard this, the exploitation of the workers, right, by the bourgeoisie. As the old Soviet joke used to have it, right, that capitalism was the exploitation of man by man, but in communism it's the reverse. Here, Marx thought, no, there would actually be a way of eliminating exploitation. What was wrong with exploitation? Well, exploitation has four components to itself, Marx thought were wrong. First, you take a vulnerable population, paradigm case, children. You use them in child labor. You use them for something, to produce products at a cheap price. You harm them in doing so, and you benefit yourself. You exploit someone, not merely when you harm them, but when they are vulnerable, you use them, you harm them, and you profit from it yourself. A system based on exploitation, he thought, was simply irrational, unsustainable. So it's a system of servitude that pretends to be freedom. It's a system that is based on, right, a morally objectionable practice. And third, as Marx famously said, it creates its own gravediggers. It will ultimately destroy itself. It will create an uninhabitable situation. So Marx, looking at this Western experience of history, of course, said we're at a moment, he thought, that Hegel has not fully understood. We're at another moment of one of these classic breakdowns. And we begin to see this, of course, in everyday life. And what will happen here? Now, what will happen, of course, is that the productive powers of capitalism will grow, right? And that, well, first there'll be a stage of socialism and then of communism. What is so good about communism? Now, note, one of the things that Marx doesn't say, and I'll come back to this with Hegel, Marx thought, in fact, explicitly held in two different places, that there was nothing unjust about capitalism. Now, if you look at those three things here, that seems striking. This is a system of servitude, a system of exploitation that creates its own gravediggers, and there's nothing unjust about it. There's nothing unjust, Marx thought, because every form of life, every economic system creates its own rules of justice. In the capitalist system, it's right for the workers to demand more. It's good, it's perfectly right for the employers not to give it to them. It's perfectly, there's just nothing unjust about this. Rather, communism is supposed to be a place where something else occurs. And again, Marx admittedly left it fairly unclear, but there were at least three aspects, supposedly, to what was going to be better in communism. First, there would be a lack of external control. That is, people would be able to direct their lives without being controlled by something, I'm going to speak very vaguely, outside of themselves. I'm going to leave it vaguely like that because I'm going to come back to what that inside-outside bit might mean. Second, not only will they not be controlled from something outside themselves, society will operate as a kind of spontaneous harmony. There will be lots of different individuals. There will be lots of different personalities, lots of different talents, but these talents supposedly now will spontaneously coordinate with each other. And again, a very attractive picture. There are many out there, you can give lots of examples of, say, being at a group where people spontaneously coordinate with each other, let's say, to help clean up something on the street. Everybody just takes part. Nobody has to give anybody orders. Everybody's just paying attention to the other person. And everybody feels free, lack of external control. Nobody's ordering you around, and there's a spontaneous harmony that's established. And thus, only in communism will each person be able to be said to follow his or her own law. Once again, a piece of spontaneous harmony. Let's say you're with a group of people, you suddenly decide to throw a party. Everybody brings some people bring the drinks, some people bring the food, some other person brings the music. Everybody has a great time. Everybody helps the whole group clean up afterwards, and it's terrific. And at the end of it, everybody was, as we used to say in the 60s, doing their own thing here. Yet everybody was nonetheless cooperating with everybody else here. Now, this was not supposed to be a system of idealism. This was a system of materialism because it was based on a theory of productive powers and so on. Now, Hegel, what I want to say, look, on this view, as I've outlined, it's pretty clear that what Marx thinks is that Hegel got some big parts of the picture right, but remained an idealist. Hegel didn't understand that really what's at stake are the productive economic powers of society, the social forces that are driving this kind of activity of giving and asking for reasons. Hegel was an idealist, of course, right? And this is captured most famously in one of the most often quoted lines in the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel's great breakthrough work that he wrote in 1807. Hegel always told his students that he considered the phenomenology to be his, quote, voyage of discovery, his Entdeckungsreise. This is where he really thought things out for the first time. It's an astonishing book. If you've read it, it's a first draft. It's written in less than a year. It's written by a man at the very kind of bottom of life at this point. He's lost his job. He has no prospects for the future. Germany is falling apart, right? War with Napoleon is imminent, so on. There's just no good outlook for him. So he writes the Phenomenology of Spirit. Very good one. The truth is to be comprehended, he said, not merely as substance, but also equally as subject. And I put up a picture I simply found on the internet. This is a complete historical fabrication. This is supposedly Hegel tipping his hat to Napoleon, who you'll notice, by the way, notices is Hegel. Hi, Hegel. This never happened. But in any event, there's the substance becoming subject in 1807, because as we know, Hegel claimed he was writing the very end of his preface. So he was writing these lines as Napoleon's army was defeating the Prussian army in Jena, practically outside of Hegel's bedroom window. And he did later say that he saw Napoleon going by, and he said, I saw the world spirit on horseback. And this has often been quoted as if he didn't mean that, somewhat ironically here. So the truth is to be comprehended as substance, not merely as substance, but also equally as subject. No, not merely as substance. Not that the truth is not to be comprehended materially, but also equally as subject here. The truth, and in other places he says, the truth is the whole. Das Wahres, das Ganze. What is the whole? Now, You might think, of course, that the whole to be grasped here would be ourselves as natural producing economic creatures working within the natural order here. That nature, really, our natural constituents, our natural components here, should be the things that will be determining this. And that ultimately a theory which located us in nature would be the theory that would best grasp what it meant to be a substance and perhaps also equally a subject. But what is now nature as a whole? Here. Hegel holds a doctrine that I call somewhat whimsically a disenchanted Aristotelian naturalism. I was looking around for a picture to illustrate this, and I couldn't find anything better. This is a cartouche outside the house in Bamberg where Hegel actually finished up doing all the proofs for the phenomenology of spirit, where he was living with the friends of a small crawfish, a Flusskrebs, as they call them in German here. And this, for nothing else than its whimsicality here, I decided to put it as a symbol of Hegel's disenchanted Aristotelian naturalism. What does this phrase mean? Look, one of the things that Hegel said, just again to outline the views as opposed to giving a full argument for them, is that we must understand that we can no longer believe in nature as an overall teleological whole. To understand something teleologically, this is going to be very important for his theory of history. To understand something teleologically is to understand something as aiming for a purpose and doing something in order to satisfy that purpose. Now, if I was asked to explain, say, why you went to the store yesterday, and if the answer is in order to buy some bread, that would be a teleological explanation. You did this because you were aiming at that, and you did this in order to do this. Nature, as a whole, does no such thing. Nature, as a whole, aims at nothing. Nature does not mean anything. This is what we have learned from Galileo and Newton and modern chemistry. And although Hegel was writing too soon, we have finally learned this also from modern biology. Now let's call this a disenchanted nature. The term disenchanted, of course, comes not from Hegel or from Max Weber. This is the term that Max Weber later used. That is, we can no longer think of nature as being animated by a purpose. So if we are looking for orientation, we cannot look to nature. I say looking for orientation. This is, of course, a term taken from Kant. Kant's essay, What Does It Mean to Be Oriented in Thought, gave one of the, I think, the best descriptions of philosophy that's probably ever been given. Kant says, remember, when we find ourselves in a very dark room with no light, we seek orientation. So what do we do? We look for a familiar landmark. So the room, all the light goes out. I feel the desk. Okay? If I know if the desk is here, then the wall should be over there, and the door should be to the right, and there it is. I look for orientation by finding familiar landmarks in the dark. The problem is that when we leave the realm of experience and we ask what things are like as a whole, we ask what the world is like as a whole, we are, metaphorically, in the dark. There's nothing to hold on to. When we leave experience behind and we ask, are we free or are we determined, for example? It's hard to get. What philosophy does is, in this darkness of pure reason, is start looking for handholds, something to orient us here. Now, for several thousand years, Europeans have thought that nature provided such an orientation. That if we just learn to act naturally, think of, say, people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, if we just learn to act naturally, we would be better. That this nature would guide us. We have to learn to trust our instincts. But this supposes that there is a place for us in nature to be guided by. If nature has no aim, if nature means nothing, then nature cannot orient us. Now, to call this a disenchanted nature, therefore, might seem to suggest that, therefore, since nature has no overall purpose, there are no purposes in nature. False. In fact, actually, Aristotle not the moderns. Aristotle was right on this. Aristotle was wrong on one other thing, but he was right on this. There are purposes in nature. That is, for every organic living form, there is something for that animal or plant that can be good or bad for it. Something that can be good or bad for it. I have a slide on this. I'll just leave it that way. Good or bad for it. How so? Well, the key example here would be the concept of disease. So you have to ask yourself the question, is disease a reality? Or is disease only a way that we human beings happen to describe things? Now, an animal is diseased when it is being interfered in its proper functioning by some internal state of itself, generally caused by some other organism or infection or something going wrong. Something has gone wrong. A purpose such as procreating, or a purpose such as eating, or fleeing from a predator is being interfered with by virtue of this. As Hegel says, a stone or a rock cannot become sick. An animal or a plant can. This is to say that there are things that can be good or bad for animals. Now, what's good or bad for an animal is really reducible more or less to a couple of things, which is not getting eaten by something else and reproducing and recreating the species for animals. Here. But nonetheless, there are, so Hegel thinks, purposes in nature. The difference between animals and humans is twofold. The animal, he says, has a purpose before it. Say, get food. Right? I'm hungry, I must eat. The animal has a purpose, but it doesn't know its purpose as a purpose. It's, can't sign a second each all step, as Hegel says in the German. Doesn't know its purpose as a purpose. Human beings know their purposes as purposes. They know them for the goal. They know a goal to be a goal. Now, to the extent, let me make a large leap here. To the extent that there are purposes in nature, there are reasons in nature. There is a reason for the spider to eat the fly. There is a reason for the fly to try and avoid being eaten by the spider. Neither the spider nor the fly understands that reason as a reason. Neither the spider nor the fly can make an inference, can use this as a basis for making, say, a judgment. Oh my gosh, I'm in a spider's net. I'm in very deep trouble. I've got to beat my wings really furiously and get out of here. Right? Oh my gosh, it's getting closer. I had better struggle more here. None of these things can know these reasons as reasons, although there are now reasons in nature. But to use another great metaphor, Hegel says these reasons are asleep. Right, metaphorically. They're not there actively as reasons. Now, although there are purposes and reasons in nature, this doesn't follow that nature itself is rational. That is, again, nature as a whole doesn't add up to anything. It's just a bunch of events going on. So there is a kind of limited meaning, a limited, to use a current buzzword in philosophy, a limited normativity at work in nature that doesn't cohere with itself. And one of the ways to look at this is to say that nature cannot organize itself into any better or worse way of being. It doesn't make any sense even to say of nature, can't you be a little better as a whole? Here. So there are purposes in nature, but nature has no purpose. There is a normativity at work in our natural material life, but this is not enough to orient us. So, question, what does it really mean to act from a reason, to understand a reason as a reason here? Now, to understand a reason as a reason, this is, for those of you who have worked in the metaphysics and philosophy of action, here, I will just indicate something very generally because I don't want to go into it in a whole lot of detail, although we can return to it in questions if you like. In the current debate about the philosophy of action, here, it is often said that what causes a person to act is their mental state, what's going on in their mind. So this is a naturally suggestive idea. For example, I feel hungry, therefore I am caused to go look for food. Or I feel angry, I'm caused to, yell at you. Or I want the room to cool down, so I open the window here. Now, that makes it look as if, therefore, to have a reason is to have some mental state that is now causing some muscular activity in the world, some inner event causing an outer event. This is, of course, the wrong way to look at it, Hegel says, because the causal relation, and here I'll give you not so much Hegel's extended argument, but a kind of intuitive, natural language argument. This causal relation holds between a substance and its action. When the lion leaps on the gazelle, we say that it is the lion that leaped, not the lion's mental state that leaped. If I punch you in the nose, you say, Terry punched me in the nose, not Terry's mental state did this. Now, there's lots of explanations. Psychologists, physiologists may want to explain all this. There's no doubt a biophysical explanation of things going on here, resulting in things happening here, but that is not the nature of an action. An action has to do with how a substance expresses itself in the world. Intentions and actions aren't two things that are causally related. Intentions and actions are two sides of the same coin. Once again, a quasi-Aristotelian idea. Let me just give you a slogan. To have an intention to do something is merely to have an action that is on the way to being realized. If I intend to go to Italy in June, all this means is that the action of going to Italy is now in the process of being realized. I'm buying tickets, looking at itineraries. An action is merely an intention that has been realized. The meanings of intentions and actions can be determined apart from each other, distinguishable, not separable, and so on. Now, if this is the case then, right, what I want to argue is that, look, what causes an action? Reasons move people only when attached to what I'm going to call their second nature, and then there's two other moves to get to Hegel's theory of freedom here. The relation of action, the agent to action, is the relation of a substance, a material being to action. To say that the lion leaps on the gazelle is to say that there's a material being, a lion, and it jumps onto the gazelle, grabs it. Okay, there's nothing idealist about this. This is something that happens in the natural world here. Agents, however, human agents, have something that distinguishes them from all the other forms of life. And that has to do with what Hegel calls, again, using Aristotle's term, second nature. Our first nature is the nature we are born with. These days, under the influence of computer technology, at least in English, we say it's the nature we are wired to have. As if we're kind of computer chips being held together by some copper wire and so on here. By the way, notice how different technologies affect the way different philosophers and people often talk of things. In the days when all people had was a few writing instruments, Locke said the mind was a blank slate. People began later talking about it as if we were clockwork, right? And these days, we think we're computers here. At best, these are metaphors. What is a second nature? A second nature is something you acquire in addition to the nature with which you are born, or what you're wired to. For example, habits, dispositions, various attitudes, so on. So just think habits, dispositions, acquired traits, etc. These form an aspect of second nature.